what America was and what it can become. This is Liberty Town Hall.
And thank you for joining us today on Liberty Town Hall as we discuss life without the Federal Reserve, at least without the Federal Reserve that we know it today.
Correct.
There's a strong movement out there to have the federal government do the job that's dictated to them in Congress and control the value of our money.
Yes.
Right now, a private company called the Federal Reserve actually holds that control. In our previous show, we were talking about the fact that the Federal Reserve's charter is up for renewal or expires or however you want to call it in 2013. This is a golden opportunity for us to get our monetary policies under control.
Yes.
Neither party is talking about it, Republicans nor Democrats. There's a strong group of people out there, 20-some million Americans that are fed up. They call themselves the Tea Party, which stands for taxed enough already. They're calling for the end of the Federal Reserve. How do you see America post-Federal Reserve versus the way we got right now? If we were to wave a magic wand and just make it go away, how we get to the end in the Federal Reserve, that's a long discussion we're going to get into. But what do you see America has post-Federal Reserve?
Well, you look, the historical model is Andrew Jackson and the charter for the National Bank that was renewable under his second term.
Right.
He vetoed the renewal. He denied the charter died, the bank died. There was some calamity in the marketplace because the National Bank charter, the Second National Bank, issued inflated currencies. It was paper money.
And then they had to level it back out.
And they had to level it back out. They had to let that paper money die, and it did.
And they did that by basically an inflationary process. So everybody's money went up, or everybody's money went down in value.
Correct. So they went back to hard currency. They went back to specie, hard currency, silver and gold. And the economy took off. We became one of the largest industrial economies just before the Civil War. And then the Civil War, because of the emergencies of war, we went into what they call the Gilded Age. And again, we boomed up. In fact, it was in 1980, without a Federal Reserve Bank, the federal... 1880, thank you, was the first billion-dollar Congress. And $1 billion 1880 currency when gold was $20 an ounce. Now, I believe today gold's sitting around $1,725 of inflated value.
Right.
But it's the same weight of gold. So you get rid of this false transparency of the Federal Reserve, we will recover, our economy will take off.
So you're saying more people will have jobs,
right?
People's dollar will go a lot further in trying to purchase and acquire goods and services. So therefore we'll have a more prosperous nation if we get rid of the Federal Reserve.
Yes, because look at our tax system. Now, during Ronald Reagan's first term, he had his friend Grace of Grace Corporation, Grace Shipping, established the Grace Commission.
So wait a minute, what is the Grace Commission then?
The Grace Commission was one of these presidential appointment
yeah, but
committees.
what were they charged to do?
To figure out the monetary failure of the federal tax system.
That's a pretty big tall order.
And what they discovered is that all individual taxes collected from us, the working Americans, paid the federal deficit. Pardon me, the interest on
just
the federal
the interest on the debt.
Yeah.
And that was back in 1984, right?
And
so in the last 20 years or 30 years now, that's just been exacerbated tremendously, correct?
Right, and the individual tax collections still only fund the coverage of the $300 billion a year in debt service.
No, I think we're up to almost a $500 billion now. Right?
But it's all from our pockets. We are paying the bankers.
So all this money is just going back to the bankers.
Correct.
On money they never had to loan to begin with.
Correct.
Right?
And Congress tells us that we're paying for services. We're not paying for services. We are paying the black hole, the Federal Reserve.
Okay, the taxpayers are on the hook for all the Federal Reserve's liabilities. So they went bankrupt before in 1933.
Yes, they did.
They could very well go bankrupt again.
They have.
And the U.S. taxpayers are on the hook.
Yes.
So if we just end the Federal Reserve right now, wouldn't that force a huge bill onto the taxpayers to bring up to zero?
No.
No?
No, no. This whole system is based upon reserve fractions. It's a fractional system.
And with the rules and lobbying that they've got over the years, they've pretty much dwindled the fractional reserve down to such a small number.
You go look at the
really don't have one.
the response to the 2008 monetary collapse on the New York Exchange, where $500 billion left the exchange in 2 weeks, they came back, created TARP, Troubled Asset Release Program, for $750 billion, which the feds used to pump $16 trillion through AIG to Europe.
When we get back, we're going to talk about that $16 trillion. And what does it mean if we actually paid that back? Where would that money go if we paid back $16 trillion? When we come back with more Liberty Town Hall.
Are you a small business reaching out to a national audience or an established company seeking more exposure? Place your ad on Liberty Town Hall and reach up to 46 million homes nationwide. Call now for a quote.
And welcome back to Liberty Town Hall. We're discussing what happens if you pay off the federal debt. And one of the problems that we were talking about was who would have money in their pocket? Ken, money in America is made today on this fractional reserve system,
yes,
where banks go hocus pocus and they create brand new money that they lend, and then when that's paid back, they destroy it.
Right.
So if we paid back the $16 trillion, that money would just be vaporized and gone, right?
Yes.
How much money would people have in their pockets if we just paid it off?
There would be zero left. They'd cannibalize us as a capital human resource. And that's what they're doing with this insidious system called fractional reserve banking.
So we become literally slaves.
We become the indentured serfs that we used to read about in elementary school about the evil medieval days of evil Prince John and merry band of Robin Hood's followers. History is linear. Nothing changes except the technology we have to share information. And we have, unfortunately, even though we have all these nice tools, we don't have the factual support of true information of how this creature from Jekyll Island has become the dominant force in the world. And they have
when Ken was talking about the creature from Jekyll Island, for those of you that didn't see the last episode, we're going through a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. This is a wonderful book. This is the 5th edition. G. Griffins wrote this book. He's got all the history and footnotes. It's all been well documented. It's been updated like 20 some times, so it's up to date and modern, and it brings it from the very beginning of when the Federal Reserve was thought of and brought into existence right up to the modern nightmare we have. And one of the things it talks about is money as debt.
Yes.
And so we got to get out of debt so we're not enslaved to this interest machine that we have to keep feeding all the time. So if there's not $16 trillion in the economy, Ken, how do we pay it back, or don't we pay it back? Do we just make a decision as a nation that says we're going to devalue our dollar and that's the way it is, this is now what a dollar is worth, we're going to live with it today and clean it up going forward? Or do we somehow try to drag $16 trillion out of the economy to pay it back?
You can't pay back what doesn't exist.
Okay.
These are paper trails. These are vacuums. They're vacuuming our wealth up. And then they redistribute that wealth through their means. I mean, this
globally.
Globally.
Right. It's not just are we building up the local redistribution of it inside the states, but we're actually redistributing the American wealth around the world through the World Monetary Fund and the World Bank.
You go back to the 1980s, how many people know that we as taxpayers lent money to the Brazilian government, and then during the latter part of the 80s, it was all forgiven?
Yes, that's a good pattern is we'll make all these high billion-dollar loans, and then 10 years later when the payments start coming due, we forgive the debt.
Yet, we're still here.
Okay.
Is my point.
But that means all those fake notes were put out there which diluted our value.
Right.
So if we try to collect in what's been out there to pay off the paper trail, there is no money in anyone's pocket.
There's literally nothing there to collect. Otherwise, they could not have these debt forgiveness programs. How can you forgive something if it exists? Somebody has to pay for it. There was nothing there to forgive. It was all fictitious paper.
But it devalues our dollar, which is why we have to pay more for oil on a global market, for example.
Well, the paper they created, the dollar they created, is out there competing for the other dollar. So you have more dollars competing for the same product. I, as the merchant, need to raise the value to collect those dollars so I can maintain my operations. It becomes a very vicious circle. And it's a spiraling downward circle where you go back to the Weimar Republic where they paid them 4 times a day so they could buy a loaf of bread. The loaf of bread cost 1,000 Reichsmarks at 8 o'clock, it cost 2,000 Reichsmarks at noon, it cost 4,000 Reichsmarks at 4 o'clock. When you went home, your wheelbarrow was empty. And the inflated currency was just unbelievable. And today it's even more
insidious. Isn't that a run on our U.S. dollar then? If we ended the Fed and just ended it, would that cause a run on the U.S. dollar?
No, there'd be no dollar to run on. You would have to revert back to the currency of the republic, which is gold and silver.
A lot of people want to go back to the gold standard, because that holds an actual material value. Where right now a dollar equals a dollar. When Nixon took us off the gold reserve, literally a dollar, a private bank note, a Federal Reserve note,
IOU,
is only equal to another IOU note, another Federal Reserve note. And it says that this dollar's good for all debts, public and private.
We're using this fictitious currency to prop up one of the most brutal regimes left in the world in Beijing.
Yep.
Beijing now holds officially around $1 trillion of bonded debt. Now people understand that bonded debt is deposited into a bank. Now under fractional reserve, that bonded debt is worth $10 trillion.
And so they keep loaning all this money out.
Correct.
So they're actually loaning us money on money that they took from the fractional reserve themselves.
Yeah, it's debt.
Right?
They're loaning debt.
So they're loaning debt now. We're enslaved to it. But everyone's house mortgages and everything going through Freddie and Fannie, all this is just including. So the banks literally, if the money pool dries up, the banks are going to foreclose on people's properties.
They're going to take your property rights.
So now when the dollar collapses and it's worth nothing and you can't pay them back, now you end up getting your property taken from you. So that's how the banks end up owning all the real property.
Yeah, you go back to the 30s during the collapse when the Federal Reserve Bank collapsed. They went belly up. And instead of closing their doors, which they should have done, those progressives sitting in the New Deal politics turned around and by a ink pen allowed them to issue non-interest bearing promissory notes, which we know is a Federal Reserve note, which is a means of exchange, an anonymous means of exchange.
The big thing people have to understand is the Federal Reserve is a private company.
Yes.
And when we come back with more Liberty Town Hall, we're going to talk about just what to do about it so that we can keep money flowing and take the burden off the taxpayers. When we come back, we got the solution for you. And welcome back to Liberty Town Hall. We're discussing what life would be like without the Federal Reserve. So, Ken, if we took the federal government and put them in control of the dollar and had the central bank actually borrow money from the federal government instead of the other way around, that means the banks would be paying interest on money to get money that they didn't have. I mean, if they want to loan their own money, that's fine, but if they want to loan more than they have, then they'd have to borrow it from like the federal government.
Yeah, it'd be a viable economic model.
Right? So if we switch that around, now any money that the government got would eventually go back to the taxpayers and go right back into the economy.
Yes.
Well, right now, the central bank is taking the money out of the economy and putting it in their pocket.
With the help of the federal government.
Well, with permission and help of the federal government.
Yes.
Right now, roughly, by the time you get done putting the payroll taxes together with what the employee pays and what the employer pays, not getting into the taxes that are burdened on the company on top of that, we're at 30 to 35% of every dollar earned goes to the federal government right now for someone making $35,000 to $40,000 a year. We're not talking about the rich here. We're talking about the average American paying the bill. And when it comes right down to it, if 35 cents of every dollar has to go to support the government, and all of that money still is not enough to pay the interest to the Federal Reserve, we are literally slaves to a private company called the Federal Reserve.
Yes.
Okay. We can't just pay off $16 trillion by collecting it from the society and taxes and whatnot and bringing it in and paying off that note. So how do we get past that switch? Because we're talking roughly, by the time you get done with all the other liabilities and whatnot, it's not just the 16 trillion that we need to be worried about. It's also like 58 trillion that we really need to worry about, right? We can't suck that money out of the economy because nobody would have any money. $1 would be worth a house by the time you get done with that. So talk about inflation in reverse. If we paid all that off, it would be a deflation at an unsustainable rate as well.
Yeah, well, you have historical precepts. This has happened in the past. We're not the first ones to be put in this spiral where we've allowed the
too big to fail's happened over and over again. It's
over
cyclic,
and over again.
Right?
The best model is the Italian city-states in the 12, 13, 1400s. They were also ended up in the hands of the Medici bankers. Evil Prince John, my favorite target of Robin Hood, was also indentured to the Medici Bank, and he just told him, come and get it. Cross the channel, I'll wait for you. He never paid him back. Medici wrote off the loss. And it was an inflated system. It was a double bookkeeping system.
Like what we got right now.
Correct.
Okay.
We as a society, as individuals, can survive this killing of this charter. We're dealing with legal fictions, the pretense. I mean, to explain this easily, read the Georgia State Financial Code. It is amazing.
And while you're down there in Georgia, look up Jekyll Island right down there. Yeah.
Visit Jekyll Island. But the Georgia Financial Code, it's so simply written. It says a financial institution may charge fees as if they may be interest.
Okay.
They've never lent you a dime. You've signed an obligation. That's
so your promise to pay is the only money that there is.
Correct.
Right?
It's
debt equals money.
Right.
Right. If you can take on debt, then you can produce money.
Correct. It's a statutory obligation. They didn't lend you money. They lent
you debt.
They lent you debt. And what they got out of you was a promise to pay every 30 days for an amortization period a set amount of money. They amortized under the fiction that they lent you money.
But they didn't have it because they made it on a fractional reserve system.
They didn't have a dime.
But when you pay them back, you're going into the real economy, getting real dollars, and paying them back in hard-earned money.
They're a vacuum.
They're just sucking it right out of the economy.
Sucking our wealth right out.
So if the federal government was in charge of the fractional money production, even though it's still on the fractional reserve system and banks can still loan all they want, the interest would come back to the people and not to the bank.
It would go to fund government services, whatever they may be.
Well, if we got to build a national highway or prop up Social Security before we get this mess figured out, things like this, but it would directly reduce the amount of taxes individuals would have to pay.
Right.
By $500 billion a year right off the bat. That's a year.
The best example of this nightmare, and I refer to this fractional banking system in collusion with the tax system at the federal and state level, is Detroit. Right. Detroit in 1950 was the wealthiest city in the world.
That's almost the epitome of the progressive movement, right?
Yeah, it is. And 45 square miles of Detroit are desolate. Just absolutely desolate.
Drive through there and basically the gangs have it now.
Right. And the kicker is they're using our tax dollars to build sidewalks to nowhere in these desolate neighborhoods.
Because we got to keep pumping the money in. Make jobs where there's no reason for it to be sustained.
It's a very vicious, cynical cycle that they do without informing us. They tell us, don't look at the man behind the curtain. The man behind the curtain is this economic model established in 1913 and we'll refer to it as what it is, the creature from Jekyll Island. And it's a political coup d'etat by statutory operation of law to suppress vibrant, real hard wealth where I can suborn it under my fictitious usurpation of your wealth, where I'm giving you fraudulent paper and demanding I have a lien upon your rights to property with that fraudulent paper, such that if I collapse, I just take your property.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about the power of the Federal Reserve and how it's really taken control over the last 100 years since the creature from Jekyll Island was born, when we return right after these messages.
Are you a small business reaching out to a national audience or an established company seeking more exposure? Place your ad on Liberty Town Hall and reach up to 46 million homes nationwide. Call now for a quote.
And welcome back to Liberty Town Hall. As we're discussing with Ken here in the studio today, we're talking about how to really get out of this nightmare and who really holds the control over the U.S. economy. Congress is set up, according to this Constitution, a split between the state's voice and the people's voice, between the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House is really giving control over the purse strings and the budget kind of mentality.
Yes.
Although I don't think they're using that authority properly.
Correct.
But who really holds the monetary authority in this country right now? The Federal Reserve or the Congress?
The Open Market Committee of the Federal Reserve.
Plain and simple. Because
plain and simple.
Ben Bernanke made a statement that warned Congress, flat outright warned them, do not pass any laws that allow you to even listen in to our private deliberations on monetary policies of this country. I'm thinking, how arrogant can a private company tell Congress that you're not allowed to even listen in when we discuss artificially lowering interest rates, doing all these things to manipulate the economy? And he cited issues of the economy on reasons why they are doing what they did. But when they do things such as the quantitative easing, in this last round they did their QE3.
Right.
They did it on September 13th, and instantly there was $6 trillion of value lost all across the country. If you go to usdebtclock.org and you look, the value of the private citizens' total value of all of our assets went down by $6 trillion overnight. And Ben Bernanke says you don't even have the right to listen into what we're doing with your U.S. economy. So who really has the power, the Federal Reserve or our Congress?
The Congress has the power, but they won't assert it. They're, in my opinion, they're not all of them, not all 535 of them are, but let's say 99.1% of them are cowards. They're political cowards. The Federal Reserve System
So if they're political cowards,
the Federal Reserve steps in.
So when there's a power vacuum, somebody else is going to fill it.
Right.
And so that's how the Federal Reserve's got
Correct.
control. And when we come back next time and have you on the show, I want to talk about how we take the power back to the people and take it away from this private company. Unfortunately, we're out of time today to get into that one. So next time on Liberty Town Hall, we're going to talk about who has the real power, although the authority belongs in Congress. God bless, and see you next time here on Liberty Town Hall.
Finally, there seems to be but three ways for a nation to acquire wealth. The first is by war, as the Romans did in plundering their conquered neighbors. This is robbery. The second by commerce, which is generally cheating. The third by agriculture, the only honest way, wherein a man receives a real increase of the seed thrown into the ground as a kind of continual miracle wrought by the hand of God in his favor as a reward for his innocent life and virtuous industry. Benjamin Franklin, Positions to be Examined, April 4th, 1769.